about the VOD and the silver screen. Kevin and Tom and Joe know all there is to know, from masterpieces to deep fried tacos. And if the movie sucks, you might hear them say, there's no telling where the guys will take you. Get ready for a spoiler. Won't say it twice, cause we already warned you. Better watch out, it's gonna ruin the plot. Real spoilers. Real spoilers. Real spoilers.
Broadcasting from the lush but not lavish studios located in the basement of the O'Keefe Institute for Advanced Film Snarkitude, this is Real Spoilers, episode 796, Unfrosted.
Oh, was that a Freudian slip?
It was not very Freudian. I would classify it more as Jungian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let's go around the table and everyone can introduce themselves.
This is Kevin.
And this is Tom. And Joe is out this week, but kind enough to join us today. It is the award-winning filmmaker behind Mr. Dress-Up, The Magic of Make-Believe, currently streaming on Amazon Prime Video, which just won 5 Canadian Screen Awards, including Best Direction. He's the writer/director of action figure adventure Planet Cool Stuff and Nintendo Quest, which has a new sequel series coming soon called Nintendo 64 Quest. Welcome, Rob McCallum. Hey, Rob, how's it going?
It's good. I am so excited to be here and talk nothing but documentaries with you guys. The occasional mention of Unfrosted, only to parlay into a greater documentary discussion.
I would be 100% up for just talking about documentaries this entire episode.
We should say, before the show started, I revealed to our guest that we had never actually covered a documentary on the show, and
that does make me feel a little bad, but we never thought about it like that.
Yeah, we really haven't. Yeah.
We just never considered them real movies.
No,
precisely.
No,
it's like it was always, we've always conceived the show as like Kevin was saying, like, what's the big movie at the box office this week, and that tends to be where we lean.
Okay, but big movies by what standards? Because there's been a lot of big documentaries that still come out. But there's been a lot of big documentaries that still come out to compete with some of the big boys out there. They might not have the same financial pull come Sunday night, but there's still buzz.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No. It is nothing against documentaries. We love them. I love the documentaries that you make. I mean,
so why don't you like documentaries, Kev?
Yeah, right.
So join us next week when we'll be digging in at 2,000 Mules.
No. Oh, yeah. Jeez. Well, no, Rob, seriously, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
I know your schedule has been crazy, and congratulations on the big win, man. Your documentary, I watched it, Mr. Dress-Up, The Magic of Make-Believe, phenomenal. I seriously cannot say enough good things about it.
Well, thanks so much. The best thing that you could say is that you will talk about it in an upcoming episode, alongside maybe that new Jim Henson doc that came out, since they both parallel kid show entertainers and people that had a lot of different ideas that became staples of our time. Huh? What do you think?
Yeah, hey, not a bad idea. I don't think it's a bad idea at all. Now, I will say, I was not familiar with Mr. Dress-Up, so I don't know. You would know more than anyone. Did that play in the U.S.?
I would hope I would be an expert at this point, so that's not your fault. No, he was very much just a Canadian staple. He was an American, of course, as you know by watching it. He was the mentee to Mr. Rogers. He's often described as Canada's Mr. Rogers because there's such a similarity in their approach.
Hold on. I just have to ask a question. Canadians are famously nicer than Americans. How can you be nicer than Mr. Rogers?
Oh,
how is that?
You can move to Canada and stay there. So Mr. Rogers got his start in Canada, and he said, this place is too nice for me. And he moved back to Pittsburgh. It was just too polite. He didn't feel like he had much work to do. So he went back to America to really make an impact.
I want to see it just for that reason alone. How are you nicer than Mr. Rogers?
Well, seriously, though.
It's not a competition of kindness, but let's just say it's
to Americans
a great
battle.
You're in America right now, Rob.
You will compete, damn it.
Hey, I'm a dual citizen. I plead the fifth here. I'm a dual citizen, Canada and America, just like Mr. Dress-Up was from Maine, became a Canadian by choice because he wanted to fully embrace it. So there you go.
And healthcare.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt.
So I was going to ask you, so I wasn't familiar with him before the documentary, but after watching it, I feel like I knew Ernie Coombs. The film does such a great job from introducing me to someone that I had no awareness of. I did not realize that he and Mr. Rogers started together when Mr. Rogers was in Canada and that he worked on that show. I mean, I learned so much over the course of this documentary and fell in love with this show and the man and the ideas. And that's the magic of documentaries is, you can learn, but also be entertained and enlightened in a way that it's just magic.
Well, Kev, I gotta break it to you. I have like one job, and half that job is to deliver information. The other half is to make sure it's done in an entertaining, interesting way. If I don't do one of those two things, I haven't done my job. So it sounds like I did my job, so I truly appreciate that you took the time and were able to get through the whole thing, didn't fall asleep, enjoyed it, and came away seemingly excited to discuss it.
Yeah, oh my gosh, absolutely. I learned so much that I never knew, and part of the curiosity is why did they not license it out, or why did it not get syndicated in America? Because
it was too much like Mr. Rogers. Literally, we found some interviews, and Disney Channel was going to pick it up, and so was PBS, but they found it too similar to stuff that they already had. Plus, there was a lot of overt Canadian values that was very much like Canadiana for the sake of promoting Canadian culture, and that might not sound like a big deal to anybody that's around the border of Canada, plus or minus 90 miles. But when you're like in Atlanta, that might feel like a stretch to understand, what we do up here. Like what's poutine? They don't understand what that is in Atlanta. So
my God.
What is this guy talking about poutine and dressing up with costumes?
I had that for the first time in my life like 4 years ago, and I'm just like,
it's delicious, isn't it?
Why the hell is that not down here?
This is delicious. My heart's never felt worse, but
right.
I can't have enough.
Like, we'll dump chili cheese into a bag of Fritos with a bunch of fried Twinkies. And...
We're like 58% of Americans are morbidly obese. We would totally love this.
It's delicious.
It's amazing, and it's such an obvious
how
thing.
You miss cheese and gravy on fries, but did everything else is beyond me.
Yeah, it's at this point, it's just being stubborn. It's
lazy.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about Mr. Dressup and the impact he had on you and what compelled you to make the documentary.
Well, I mean, he was a staple growing up, much like any of us. We had those kids shows, so whatever country you're from and you're listening to this, you probably had your own version of Mr. Dressup. In the U.S., it could be Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers or even maybe Captain Kangaroo or Romper Room. There's just sometimes those kids shows that you latch onto, and it comes from an age where there was adult live action people talking to you through the screen, so you felt like you had value and you were important. And that was no different than Mr. Dressup. And Mr. Dressup, the big difference between Mr. Rogers and that show is you didn't have to take a trolley to go to the world of imagination. The world of imagination was right there, and he showed you basically how to turn it on. And it just kind of developed your creative muscles, and whether that's doing a craft and pulling pieces together that you don't think will fit, whether that's him doing sketches and drawings and watching it unfold, or just him acting out of, a different kind of play or a different version of, the Three Little Pigs, kind of like fractured fairy tales. It was just so compelling that every segment was this sense of discovery. It wasn't about conflict. It's like, oh, what is this going to be? It's honestly like the foundation of YouTube and TikTok. It's like, here's my drawing video for starting from nothing all the way to the end, time compressed, right? Here's how I built this, the do-it-yourself type of ethos that is so prevalent on the creator community right now. But that's kind of where it started, and it lasted for 40 years if you include syndication. And that really impacted me, especially as a filmmaker, where the show's talking about resourcefulness and using the items that you have around you, like toilet paper tubes or leftover bits of paper to make something, or an old jacket to put on where you can become a knight. You're not wearing a suit of armor, but once you put something on, that's the excuse to go to the world of fantasy. And that's all you need as a kid. And having that foundation as a kid that, well, all I need is this one thing, whether it looks legit or not, to do the thing that I want, well, then that's a great building step to, figuring out what you want to do. Because if I can envision how to solve the problem, then I can beat the problem. I always like to say you can't go to the moon unless you imagine how to get there. So here's a show that really emphasized kids' imagination. And it wasn't about, oh my goodness, Danger Bay is going to explode unless we stop the mayor's cat from taking the diamond. It's like, okay, that's fun. I like superhero type stuff too. But this isn't about, oh my God, something's going to happen if we don't do this thing. It's a safe, quiet place that's patient. It's in the moment. It's kindness, right? All these things seem to go out of vogue, but they're more important now than ever.
It sounds like it was kind of an equalizer in terms of like you didn't have to buy a specially branded thing. He was using things that everyone would have around their house regardless of socioeconomic status.
All on purpose too, right? It was on Canada's public broadcaster, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and it aired coast to coast to coast, the north side too. And you've got communities that are very cut off from civilization that, wait for planes to drop cargo of supplies. So what kind of stuff does everybody have so that everybody feels included on this? That was the approach, literally to unify the country by the simplicity of what we have around us, and not to have to go buy something to feel like you can participate. Like, what a kind of a horrible message to send a kid, that you're not welcome unless you buy this.
Yeah, well, and one of the facts that I learned from the documentary that I thought was so impressive was his improvisation skills. The fact that scripted wasn't necessarily working for him, and that's just not the way that he best delivered these messages, and how talented for decades to be improvising live shows like that.
I mean, the show got lucky in that they found Ernie Coombs, who was the Swiss Army knife of talented folks. He could draw remarkably well. He could act like anybody. He could improvise. He could roll with the punches. He could just make the scene go. He was really the perfect candidate, and I can't imagine trying to do that show again with anybody else, because he's like one in a million. The improvisation specifically, though, made it feel real. Sometimes we trip over words, or, we're talking in the moment. We're actually listening to people like actors that improvise or do, so that they can respond accordingly and not just say their next line of dialogue. Sometimes that doesn't line up if you're just waiting for your line, and sometimes you just wait for the other person to speak so you say your line. But when you're actually listening and you're in the scene, then you have something organic and it feels more real. Try doing that with puppets as well, where you're looking at something that it has life to it because it's being manipulated, but isn't the same as looking in someone's eyes. So he's a remarkable performer.
And what if the puppet says something about Nietzsche?
Yeah, that's right. So the puppets can throw them off, especially in rehearsal, just to keep it loose. And there's a lot of reasons why that show worked the way that it did. And I think Canadians everywhere are super lucky. And it's sad that we have already a whole generation that doesn't know what that show was, because it's been pulled off the air, and it's really hard to find episodes of it.
Got it.
Gotcha.
Well, congratulations again on the success. I mean, that's just phenomenal. I'm so happy. It's well-deserved. It's a great documentary. I'm recommending it to everybody. I want to talk about another documentary you've done, Rob. So I talked to Patrick Scott Patterson, who was on the show last week, and I told him Nintendo Quest, still PSP. One of my favorite. Yep, PSP, the original. I told him it is one of my favorite documentaries on video games still to this day. It is so fun.
So you got my bribe in the mail. It went through. I didn't hear anything. I saw the funds withdrawn. I just assumed that it kind of went through and we were just going to tee this up somehow. I appreciate that.
He would have done it sooner, except he had to convert it all to U.S. currency. Yeah. And
he hasn't said anything because you don't talk about documentaries on your movie show, because they're not real movies.
We edit it all out. We talk about it all the time. Kevin takes it out.
I mentioned Documentary Corners, one of, I thought, my most popular segments on the show, and it's, I guess, never
Turns
made it
out
to
it's
air.
never aired.
Yeah.
In 10 years.
Weird.
But Nintendo Quest is seriously one of the best video game docs. It's so fun following Jay's journey. You followed it up with other shows like Action Figure Adventure and Raising Money for Charity, and I love the idea that you've kind of gone that direction and turned your next project, Nintendo 64 Quest, into kind of an amalgam of both of those, and I just want you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, Nintendo Quest was a pretty phenomenal experience. It's kind of like you don't know what you're getting into until you go through it and you go back and go, wow, we had no idea what we were up against, both conceptually when we decided to do this and what it would take to actually deliver on what we set out to do, and then kind of decide, hey, are we going to do this again, or are we not going to do it again? And it's always easier not to do something again, because will it ever live up to the original? It's only going to be compared and contrast. So it's got to really have a different form factor. And Nintendo Quest, I mean, we filmed it a little over 10 years ago now, which doesn't sound like that long, but it's eons ago in my poor, humble brain that is covered with dust. And I've done many projects since then. And Jay and I, like you said, we've done Action Figure Adventure. We turned our podcast, The Jay and Rob Toy Show, into a television series that ran for 20 episodes. And I've done Power of Grayskull and video game box art and other little things along the way. And every time it's like, does it make sense to do it? How would we do it? How would we do it? And it really didn't come to fruition until we had gone through Action Figure Adventure. I thought, okay, this charity angle makes a little bit more sense because I don't want to see you collecting for your own shelf again. Not that people don't do that, not that that can't be interesting, but I always want to do a little bit more. How can we go a little bit further? Well, let's, celebrate the past by trying to preserve it. And Jay had lost his mom to Alzheimer's and dementia. My grandfather has been recently diagnosed as well. So, there's the perfect cause to go and try to raise money for. And how are we going to do that? Well, like Action Figure Adventure, Jay's going to front the cash in pursuit of this collection. And when he's done, whatever he amasses in the 14 days in the pursuit of these 296 games with no online purchases, all mom and pop stores and collectors along the way, we'd raffle them off, plus donations and stuff that we could sign. So you wouldn't know, what he did until you saw the show came out, but you had a chance to own the journey, and everything would benefit Alzheimer's and dementia. And it just felt like the best organic way to do it. And Super Nintendo didn't make sense because it's only like a refined evolution of the NES. It's not as an interesting conversation topic. It's like Super Nintendo's great. The library is awesome. But there's not much to say about it other than the console wars, which frankly we've talked about a million times at this point in the gaming scene. But the N64 represents a really interesting era of games. It's that first leap into 3D gaming. There's never been more consoles on the market. People were experimenting like crazy, probably for the last time in history. People were taking flyers on the weirdest concepts. They weren't just regurgitating sequels and sticking to key franchises. So it really represented a different point in gaming, and it was just before the internet really took hold as well. So the last era of couch co-op, which was the definition of multiplayer, until basically kind of Halo came along and made that LAN. And then from there, World of Warcraft showed that, we don't ever need to breathe the same oxygen to hang out with people. Which we got a little bit with Doom, of course, but, it's a little bit different now.
Now, is that a segue? Because some really, really exciting news. I mean, on top of all the other cool stuff you have coming on, you were just announced as directing a documentary based on the creator of Doom and his book.
Yeah, so I've been attached to write and direct John Romero's autobiography, Doom Guy, which came out last summer. It's a great read. If you haven't checked it out, please do pick up the book. The audiobook is out there as well, and John reads that. It's a great 19-hour audiobook, so you really get into the depth and the weeds of what John had to go through, not only on the software side and what he did through his career, but his personal side that kind of laid the foundation for all that and how that ebbs and flows between the two. It was really cool talking to John and his wife, Brenda, and, was I going to be the right fit? Was I not going to be the right fit? I don't know how many people they had talked to. It's really none of my business, but a lot of things lined up and clicked, and I've been sitting on this secret for, more than a few months, and it's like, I want to tell people I get to do something with John, because John is awesome, right? So it should be fun, and, we're still looking for a buyer right now, so we're not sure where it's going to land, but we're actively developing it, and that press release really ignited some people, and people got, genuinely excited by it, which was really cool to see, and confirmed all our beliefs that while we're working for free in the background trying to make this thing happen, that there are people excited, and yes, we should keep doing this.
Absolutely, and I loved seeing all the trades pick it up and you guys getting the attention and it coinciding with your other documentary that just won all the awards. I mean, what a week for you.
And that wasn't planned at all. We had talked about does the press release come out here? Does it come out there? And ultimately, we had it written before we ever knew if we were going to win awards for the Dress Up documentary. But it's kind of up to the different publications' schedule and the reporters when they want to push something. So the fact that the Doom announcement came out 3 or 4 hours before the award aftermath happened was just, it made for a really crazy day for me on Thursday.
Well, thanks
in
for
the
taking
best
the time.
way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for taking
It's a happy good problem.
Before we get into the movie, tell us how people can get involved with Nintendo 64 Quest.
Well, if you go to Nintendo64Quest.com or N64Quest.com, we shelled out enough money for both URLs, so N64Quest.com.
Bragger.
You can read about the whole project right there. Yeah. Right now, we have a link to our raffle there, so if you want to potentially own a game that Jay has found along the way, there's options to do that. If you just want to take a shot at getting some merch or just a random chance to win something, that's all there too. So we're raising funds. The raffle auction will happen at the end of July, tentatively right now. But we're looking for other ways to possibly raise some money as well. So keep an eye on that space, and you'll hear more about where you can watch it as well, and probably see some more clips linked in there as time rolls on.
Awesome.
Like you said, sorry, it's the difference between Nintendo Quest being a 90-minute film is this is a 13-episode series. So for everybody that always wanted more of Nintendo Quest and they only had that 90-minute kind of window into that adventure, which is great for so many other reasons, here is your in-depth look at the journey, kind of sitting shotgun as we go store to store to store.
Well, I wore out those DVDs on the Kickstarter, the special 3 or 4 disc edition, trying to find more Nintendo Quest. So I love hearing that it's a series.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad because it's like there probably isn't a next one in the series because it's all downloadable content now.
Well, we joke about stuff like Wii Quest, all the games that are out there, or GameCube Quest, or just generally doing like a gamer quest and looking for some of the most iconic games across all time and all systems, again, with a charitable angle there. Maybe it's not, Jay, in this case, having a budget of $20,000 to try to get this whole set of 300 games in 14 days. What can you do with 5,000 across only 5 days? Where can we go? How far can we go? What kind of leads can we scare up to get a really rare Atari card? Is there a market for it? Is it worth it? Do we stick to Nintendo stuff because there's that baked in Nintendo tax and that instant fan base? So there's some interesting angles that we could do if this proves successful, and we have other opportunities. But for right now, we're really just focusing on getting this one. And this is what happened last time. It's like, oh, I can't wait to see this. Hey, next one, can you do Sega Quest? It's like, we got to get this out first. And this is part of the streaming mentality that has been baked into us, right? We can watch this stuff so quickly, especially a 90-minute film, that people forget that it takes like 2 to 3 years, on average 5 years for a documentary to get created from the concept all the way to release and marketing. So it's a lot of work, and we're a team of like 7 people at most on a good day. And it's not that easy to just replicate because someone says, I want to see the next one. We do our best. If you love it, support it. And the more support that it is, the easier it is to do the next one, because then all the costs will be paid off, and it's easier to say, yeah, we should do this. It makes financial sense because it's show business at the end of the day. Business.
It's fascinating, the psychology that goes into how people watch shows. And I find myself doing this, where it's like there'll be like a 90-minute or hour 45-minute like documentary, like even just something like simple like true crime, and then I'll be like, I don't know, I'm in the mood for a movie, but then I'll sit down and watch like 3 episodes of a true crime thing, and I'm just like, why do I do that?
Part of that is attention span, right? And part of that is storytelling structure. It's why the 15-second video on YouTube or TikTok is so compelling, because if you know that is your window, you can make something compelling in that time frame, and it clicks the endorphins in your head as a viewer, like, oh, that was great, I want to consume more. And you feel like you're actually accumulating more information because it's shorter digestible bites rather than sitting down for a long buffet meal of 7 courses of things that you're scared to see at the very end because you don't know if you'll have room for dessert. But if you just take a puzzle piece approach to it, it becomes much more manageable. I completely see what you're saying. We actually switched because Nintendo Quest was originally going to be episodic. We thought, no, we'll do a feature, which is why it was so easy for us to transition to the Power Tour, which was a follow-up series, and then Action Figure Adventure, because it's Jay going in a store, what does he find? So we just really refined how that kind of worked for cameras and what would happen in the editing to make it more bite-sized. We could basically take a 2-hour feature and cut it into 6 episodes. It's still 120 minutes, 20-minute episodes. It's the same thing. So we have adjusted as viewing habits have changed as a result. It limits where you can show stuff. Like, we can't do a theatrical screening of 13 episodes anymore, but we might do 3 or 4, and hopefully that'll push the other series. But it's just people want to consume bite-sized things because we have lots of little amounts of time instead of big chunks of time to fill.
I would think in today's marketplace, it's easier to sell a TV show over a feature-length documentary. Am I wrong?
Well, the one advantage to a TV show, depending on how it gets released, is you potentially can release it week to week to week to week. So you have a marketing spend that spans, if it's 10 episodes, over 2 months, where you get to have that buzz. Like, look at The Mandalorian, right? When that show dropped, people were talking about what happened this week, and that's a nice organic pull that you get to discuss versus one and done when it gets dropped as a feature, which was our concern with Mr. Dress Up. It's like, okay, it played at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, which was not something we expected, and that was the premiere. It's like, okay, now we have a built-in runway, because now it's only here. It's exclusively to everybody that comes in the festival, and they have to wait over a month before they see it on Prime. So now we have like a bit of a runway to help build the marketing momentum. But if this is another film, whether it's like a Netflix original or a Prime original that doesn't have a festival component to it, and it's just boom out on like Friday or Tuesday, that's it. You're kind of splashed unless there's something other that extends the life of the film. So it's very difficult to do a 90-minute feature, especially with streaming platforms, to have the same kind of impact. And it almost re-emphasizes the importance of film festivals, which has been completely diluted and lost. It's somewhat in part thanks to the rise of streamers, because there's more content ever than to watch everywhere. And if you've gotten into a festival, then people want your film because it has a bit of pedigree. So now they have an easier access to it at the risk of not going to the festival to see it.
Kind of reminds me of Comic-Con, how, studios took over Comic-Con, which originally was about comics.
Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Oh, yeah, isn't that
weird?
Amazingly enough.
I thought it was about
But, now that you say
comment.
it makes a lot more sense given the name.
Allow me to suck up to the Canadian side of you. So when I was in college, I was a mass communications major. I wrote my final communication class paper. It was called Invasion USA, The Impact of American Television on Canadian Cultural Sovereignty.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good fancy read from my film theory days.
Yeah. It was all about how, like in Canada, for our, you obviously know this, but for our American listeners, in Canada there were all sorts of rules and regulations about broadcast television and radio. A certain percentage of it had to be Canadian content, or you couldn't air it. And then they were using cable TV to just like, well, we'll just syndicate a bunch of American shows, and like the impact that was having on the people who produced content in Canada. So
yeah, there was huge political loopholing, especially through the 80s and in the 90s with the rise of cable and satellite, and how you circumvent that stuff. Some of that got put back to tax credits. So if you want to recoup some money for shooting shows in Canada or claiming it as Canadian, had to meet certain guidelines. And then there's people just like, no, we're just going to fill airtime and we're going to do it kind of our own kind of pirate radio style.
And at the time, Canada was the second most cabled country in the world. So
Sounds
number
about right.
one,
What's that?
Belgium. No idea why.
Huh.
Yeah. Canada made sense because it's so spread out.
Yeah.
Right? Like you would,
We've
like
always
that
had a
was-
huge telecommunications network for whatever reason, much like our banking system. We have like 9 banks through our entire country, right? It's not like every city has their own bank like it is in America. Like you see a strip mall, there's a nail salon, a lovely Mexican restaurant, and a unique bank. That's not like it is in Canada. There's like at one point there was only 6 banks, and now over the last 30 years they've allowed like 6 more to come into fruition. But yeah, it's pretty democratized. Everything is really bound together on the federal level, and that's what I always say when people ask, "What's the difference between Canada and America?" Well, it's the United States. It's like the states themselves as individuals are united under this umbrella, but Canada is much more. It's like the country federally first, and then everything underneath it. What documentary do you guys want to talk about next?
Anything but Frosted.
So before we dig into the movie, let's knock out some shameless plugs. Don't forget we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, wherever you find a podcast. You can find us while you're there. Be sure and follow us so you never miss an episode. Maybe check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/real spoilers. While you're there, like the page, join the group. It's called the League of Show Sharers because we are hoping you will share an episode. People who were kind enough to share an episode last week include librarian Cynthia, Tammy Lynn Powers, Betts, Travis Tewitt, Lane Levanway, Glenn Cougar Mellenbrewer, Tom Dowdy, Richard Krotzer, Chris Valls, Phil Timon, Jason McLean, Chris Magic Man, Ralph Tribble, Gabriel Lugo, Julianne Jordan, Heather Sachs, Taylor Ward, David Rojas, Vertigay 314, Binge Movies, Matt Naglia, Ronnie Castle, Mike, and Oscar, NostalgiaCast, Geek to Me Radio, Colby Mack, In Session Film, and Ryan Terry. So thank you very much for sharing an episode. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/real spoilers, where for $5 a month, you get all sorts of bonus content, and we like you extra. And also don't forget, you can watch all of these over on the YouTube. So
yeah, almost 500. I think we're at 492 subscribers. So, we're just a up and comer on YouTube. So we're,
you know what would make it go to 1,000 real quick? Talking about documentaries.
Man, I think we're onto something here. We got to get some tips from Rob's. I mean, award-winning filmmaker. He knows what he's talking about.
I'm just saying you could do supplemental kind of quick hot takes on some documentaries that seem to get some buzzworthy in addition to your already amazing weekly show.
I love it. I tell Tom all the time that I find myself watching a lot of YouTube videos and shows. I mean, even like video game shows, The Game Chasers and Gaming Historian, and people are making documentaries. Filmmakers are making these YouTube videos, which are really documentaries. And so I find myself drawn to that sometimes more than narrative films. So I'm all about it.
It's whatever's, digestible. It doesn't matter the platform. Hopefully people have started to realize that in the last 10 years. I mean, when YouTube creators have audiences in the millions that outdraws the Super Bowl, like that people need to start clicking into what that means.
Absolutely. It's like it just like we discussed with streaming films, that it used to be when streaming started, people would poo-poo that, much like television, where they say, oh, that's a streaming release, right? But I mean, these are films. It doesn't matter if they're released to streaming.
It's funny, if you go back in time, each new medium goes through that period, right? Radio was initially like, well, I mean, they weren't big enough to make it in vaudeville. And then radio develops its own stars, and then that becomes the celebrity currency of the day. And then TV starts, and it's like, well, not very many people have TV, and who's really watching this? And then they just start grabbing the radio shows and putting them on television, and then they finally develop some hits, and then TV eclipses radio, and then
movies,
I mean, you see it over and over and over.
So again. YouTube it's got to be the most viewed medium for content now, and I don't mean content in a derogatory way. I just mean content enveloping short reviews and stuff that we do, podcasts, TV shows, movies. I mean, YouTube is another medium to deliver these things.
Yeah. The scary part though is that in the past, there were 3 or 4 networks, where now there's there's YouTube,
right?
And that's kind of it, right? I mean, I know TikTok, but you didn't have a situation where the medium was one channel owned by one entity.
But at least it's creator driven though. So YouTube's not putting out, it's not like CBS is the one that everyone goes to. It's
right.
YouTube is creator driven, and it's so catered because I can go to these video game channels. I can go watch Rob's channel. I can go watch the person that does updates on the news. I can follow the people that I trust and the topics that I want to see, and instantly I can go watch a 4-hour documentary on the Galactic Star Cruiser, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just all there on YouTube.
Yeah.
We ready to jump into the movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Unfrosted. Let's dig in, shall we?
So Unfrosted.
What did you guys have for breakfast? That's what I want to know.
I had a Cliff white chocolate macadamia breakfast bar.
I had 7 eggs and 2 pieces of toast.
All right, Rob, did you eat Pop-Tarts to get yourself in the mood for this?
No, but what I love is that there's the warmth of the toaster in one corner, because anything warm makes it better. And then here's like the great-great-great-grandchild of the Pop-Tart in your Cliff Bar. That's what I love, what you guys have seemingly unknowingly done here. You have basically created the recipe for why talking about Pop-Tarts matters.
There you go. I love it. See it.
I think we need to start by talking about General Mills erasure.
Oh,
We're just going to act like General Mills doesn't make cereal? Is that what we're doing?
Hey, he was in there. He was in the meeting of the 5 cereal families, Tom. I don't know if you...
token.
Token cereal.
Yeah.
So... Unfrosted is the directorial debut of Jerry Seinfeld. Kind of interesting. He's never done a film until now. Co-written by 3 of his Seinfeld co-writers, Spike Feresten, Barry Marder, and Andy Robin. It's set in 1963, and it's all about Kellogg's versus Post and the race to make the first toaster pastry.
Yeah.
What an exciting premise. What a must-watch, must-see TV turned feature film. I don't know how you guys have slept on this to now. I'm so fortunate that somehow 4 weeks have gone by with this film being out there, creating controversy left, right, and center to finally have the time in the window.
It's like so I had seen the reviews of the movie, but I had not watched it until yesterday. And I will say, it's not as bad as people are making it out to be in my mind, but it's also not great.
But
like, it's
the people that are talking bad about it are a younger generation. This is a movie about the nostalgia of the 1960s. So people are not going to be interested in this topic.
Is that what this movie's about, though? Is that what it's really about?
I mean, it's
How do you guys want
line-
to start this? Are we starting whether we liked it or didn't like it, or
let's
what other
let's
people
get
have
into
said?
it. You
How do
tell
you
us
want
what
to do this?
You tell us what you thought, Rob.
we'll start if you liked it.
If this was a documentary, no, you know what?
If this is a documentary, you'd be thrown in jail because it's all made up information. No, go for it.
I absolutely loved this film.
Wow,
that's great.
And I know why people don't like it,
Yeah.
but I think they've missed the point.
Okay.
I think people hate it, and the reasons they hate it were done on purpose.
Okay.
Like, you're supposed to not like that thing, and that's a whole commentary on the film industry itself. It's this big, overproduced, bloated thing that people are making a big deal about, much like the plot in this, that ultimately doesn't matter. Even Seinfeld has said in interviews, it's like, they're like, oh, do you want to direct another movie? He's like, no, I don't. It's like, why not? It's like, because movies don't hold the same value that they used to. It's not like the water cooler thing where, like, did you see Star Wars? Did you see Jaws? It's like, on to the next thing. He's like, I can't believe people take this so seriously, like, you know, their life completely revolves around it. He goes, that's why I like stand-up, because it's an authentic reaction to something that is truth. It's either funny or it's not. It's not this big contrived thing where you can rope people in on this falsified agenda with this structure, this promise of something that isn't there, and then they got all upset when it's not. It's complete artifice at its best. And now we're at a point, you know, you mentioned that it's set in the 60s or a version of the 60s. Now we're at a point that when you look back, especially if you're somebody who's in their 20s now or their early 30s, you look at that might as well be a fantasy film that's on par with Lord of the Rings, because it is so far different than what we deal with day to day and what we've seen in the last 30, 40 years. Even Mad Men has these fantastical moments where it's like, are they playing the period angle, or are they actually skewing into some surrealism here, especially where we see that series end, right? And you see him bring in the Mad Men characters to even kind of, you know, push that up a little bit. So this is all just kind of like a big joke on the viewers and the whole community of people that watch films and that take it so seriously. It's like, it's a movie. Relax. It's absurd that anybody would want to watch a movie about the invention of Pop-Tarts and think that they're going to get something factual out of it, because it doesn't matter. It's not a documentary. He's even done short spots with Ken Burns saying, Ken, if you put your name on this, people will think this is a really big deal and that it's factual. He's like, well, I'm not putting my name on it because it's not factual. He goes, it doesn't matter. Just put your name on it. That's what they'll think. You know?
I love
he's having a laugh at all of us at the state of our entertainment industry, and people have missed that point.
Well, I think we've had this rash of movies that are like these loving homages to products, which in and of itself is kind of a weird subgenre of film about a movie celebrating Air Jordans or Tetris or Beanie Babies, like
or Cheetah, or what was it?
Yeah,
Flamin' Hot
Cheetahs.
It's the
which
weird
apparently that story is completely made up. Yeah.
It's the weird pseudo biopic, right? Like when you can't tell the story of a person. And I mean, hey, I made a biopic on a children's show, and we've seen a lot of them. We mentioned the Jim Henson one is coming out. There's been a couple of different ones on Sesame Street. You can throw a rock and hit one of these like kind of documentaries. The next rung down is, okay, well, how do we do a biopic on a product or a movement that happened? And here comes Unfrosted to take, you know, all the gravitas out of all that.
Yeah.
I love the idea. You're making me like the movie more thinking of it in that regard. I mean, if Jerry Seinfeld really was going for that, I think there is something to that. But the thing is, we've seen a lot of films where people do this, where it's this larger than life. This is told, it's wrapped around, it's like a tall tale, right? And we've seen movies. We've seen this like Big Fish, The Princess Bride, Secondhand Lions. We've seen these tall tales telling a story.
But those are also such genuine approaches where the tall tale becomes endearing, and that you should take away that it's okay to do that because the greater good comes from that. There's nothing greater from this at all.
Well,
what he says about the Pop-Tart is his favorite thing is it can never go stale because it was never fresh in the first place. Right? But if that doesn't describe this movie, I don't know what does. If that doesn't describe the state of where, you know, the purpose of some of these movies coming out is, I don't know what does. It's a giant joke about it all. And the fact that we all lined up because of all these stars are in there, that's the frosting, people. They call it Unfrosted, but the frosting is, look at all these comedy names in there. Every scene is like a scene stealer coming in a way to kind of just up the ante. It's like, oh, did you see that Bill Burr where he was Kennedy? Man, that was funny, calling those kids like their childs with their drawings. Like, it's all frosting. Hollow calories. That's all this is. That's all we watch. You know, like you said, we'll watch 4 episodes of 45 minutes of true crime, but we won't sit down and watch something important. It's because we just want to binge junk food because we don't know what to do with our minds anymore.
Well,
we're just filling the gaps because we're so uneasy about the world around us.
I love that idea. I love approaching it from that. But then we have films like Dewey Cox. We have films like Pop-Star, Never Stop, Never Stopping. We have films like Weird, the Al Yankovic story. And they're so good. And he's trying to make a film, I believe it comes off as trying to make an imitation of one of those, but it's just not as funny as those.
I think some of it comes down, and I hate to say this, but each generation changes what they think is funny,
right?
And I think maybe he's falling outside of that.
Yeah,
and it's just a natural evolution of Bob Hope in the 40s and 50s is great. By the 60s and 70s, not so much. And you see this repeat over and over. There are very few comedians who stay hysterical and relevant until the very end.
Like George Carlin maybe is an
George
exception
Carlin,
to the rule.
Groucho Marx, but you're talking about like once in a generation voices. Typically what people find funny shifts. I mean, you go like, I love Abbott and Costello, but I'll go back and watch an old Abbott and Costello movie. I don't sit there and laugh necessarily, but I enjoy it. But like at some point the slapstick thing falls by the wayside and people want a different type of comedy, and I think he's just not that anymore. I bet you people, and I can't help but notice that the people that have the nicest things to say about the movie are the older two in this conversation.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's because, you know, Seinfeld was a staple. You know, he was part of the Tonight Show generation with Johnny Carson, that great pantheon of comedians that got the A-OK from Johnny and then went on to have amazing careers. Jerry Seinfeld, Jay Leno, David Letterman, Gary Shandling. The list goes on. And they all did amazing things. But when he stepped out of the limelight from his own sitcom, and then there was like a 4-year gap, and he did a 1-year show called, you know, The Marriage Ref. I think that's what it was called.
Oh, yeah.
And it was kind of, again, having a gas. And then he came back into Comedians in Cars for like 9 seasons, quote unquote, because every season had different variations. He was largely out of the public eye. So the public basically didn't watch him once Seinfeld went off the air in 1999. So there's been 25 years where he hasn't been the most dominant comedic voice out there. So it doesn't surprise me now that he's 70 years old somehow that people are, you know, getting adjusted to him. So people that, have grown up with him and watched everything that he's done for the last 25 years, especially Comedians in Cars, you know, they get this kind of humor, this dry sense of humor that is unapologetic, that isn't going to like be gentle. It's just going to say what it is because the authenticity matters. Obviously, people that like Curb Your Enthusiasm are obviously going to be the other kind of demographic that fit into this because Larry David's humor is very similar to Jerry Seinfeld's. But outside those two guys, and maybe some Chris Rock stuff, who has always been in the public spotlight, obviously more recent events than ever, he hasn't been there. So I don't know if it's him falling out and the generation moving on, which I don't disagree, but he just hasn't been present. And when you're not present, you can't get that momentum to keep going. He also co-wrote B-Movie as well, right? Which was
all these guys, wrote the B-Movie,
you know, which I didn't hate. I know people love to hate on that movie too, and I was just like, it's a cute little.
But a courtroom drama for kids? Come on,
but I mean,
it's weird.
Okay, but like if you zoom out enough, Toy Story is weird. It's an existential crisis for kids, right? I mean, Up starts
but that's because
with
kids have existential crises every day. Their whole identity and reality gets shattered when the routine isn't preserved. So Toy Story makes sense, but the idea of a talking bee going to courtroom legal battle for the sake of all beat 'em, you know, is just
a lot of kids
little out there for a kid's concept.
A lot of kids end up in the middle of court battles.
Yeah. Well, hey,
I get it.
You're not. I mean, we haven't even talked about the kid that sued Nintendo. Come on, it happens.
You know what? Nobody's safe from Johnny Law.
But I love the approach you're taking on it, and that's why it's great to have different opinions and different voices coming in. I love the idea of what he's doing. It's just the execution, because I love absurdist comedy. I love the Lonely Island. This feels like it's a Lonely Island movie without the Lonely Island's voice and writing in it.
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of the movie. And when they do absurd things like the serial funeral, like I love that on paper. I think that's hilarious and absurd and crazy. But I don't think it was that funny in this movie. And it was a battle with myself.
I think because it's a satire. I think the struggle that the film has is that it's a satire, but you don't.
What?
But exactly. But what are they are they satirizing? Are they satirizing corporate America? Is it breakfast
But they're
cereal?
not, right?
Is
Like,
it
that's
movies that talk about products? Like it doesn't.
I
it never
think
really
they're
has
satirizing
teeth to it.
pop culture.
Yeah.
It's the expectation machine where we've always got to have the next big thing, which is part of corporate America, but it's because it's also Jerry Seinfeld and these big comedic stars, and it's on Netflix. It's satirizing, how all of this works and why it just constantly gets regurgitated. And what better way to talk about regurgitation than a movie about food?
Well,
Yeah.
and that's why the movie on paper, I think, is a really good idea and a really funny idea, but it's not
Let's
biting
also
enough.
go back, too, though. Let's go back to 2011 when Jerry Seinfeld's on Howard Stern. They're talking about the aftermath of B-Movie. Would you ever want to do, another movie? He goes, no. He goes, you don't have any ideas? He goes, the only thing that ever intrigued me is over 10 years ago would be looking at the invention of the Pop-Tart and how these cereal kings are trying to get this thing out there before anybody else. Like, it matters. Like, they're going to revolutionize the first thing you put in your mouth in the morning. It doesn't matter, but it's the absurdity of this 1960s race, like to the moon, but for cereal. He thought it was ridiculous over 10 years ago. So clearly, because if you look at all the streaming platforms and how big stand-up comedy is, we get 3 new specials every week. Netflix is like, hey, we want Jerry Seinfeld to be in our stable. Can we back up enough money and dump it in his driveway for him to do something and bring enough of his friends that people are going to watch even 15 minutes of this so that it becomes buzzworthy, whether they love it or hate it, just talk about it.
And this idea was brewing for over 10 years. Like Rob said, it makes sense that during COVID, they would dust it off. It was a writing exercise. Let's see if we could actually write this movie about the Pop-Tart, as absurd as it seems. And again, kudos to them for making it happen. That's the thing. I love the idea that this exists. It's ridiculous it exists, to Rob's points and all that. I guess I just wish it were executed better. I wish that it could have been funnier because I love that it does exist.
Can't be funnier. It can't be funnier. The fact that it's not super funny and not a home run is the point. The Pop-Tart, if we want to look at the success of that, wasn't a home run. It wasn't, it's not that great.
But it's still
this
around
movie
today.
isn't going to be not that great. It's just going to be okay. You're going to reach for a Pop-Tart like, hey, you know what? I'll do this. This sounds like a good idea. You're going to take a bite. You're going to be like, oh, this is an interesting thing. You're going to swallow and instantly regret it and swear you'll never do it again. And then 6 months, you'll do it again.
I've never regretted a Pop-Tart.
Because you've had frosted ones.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, they do look terrible unfrosted.
Unfrosted Pop-Tarts are bad. Frosted
Do you remember when you
Pop-Tarts.
had your first cold Pop-Tart when you've only had warm ones? Like your parents would always follow the instruction. They'd put them in the toaster because
that's the
you got to
trick.
have
You cannot give your kids toasted Pop-Tarts or they'll always want them that way. You got to tell them that doesn't exist.
No, because if they're going to be responsible for themselves, you see if they're lazy enough to toast them or just eat it right out of the package.
We made that mistake with the first kid. We let him have chocolate milk, and then all he ever wanted was chocolate milk. So the other kid, we just never gave chocolate milk. And to this day, he's 20 years old, and he'll every day 3 glasses of milk.
Oh,
that's where you just got to start diluting the container with like real milk, and so that it becomes like lighter and lighter. And he's like, "What happened to all the chocolate in this?" It's like it's just the way they make it now. Nothing is as good as it used to be. I'm sorry. Welcome to adulthood.
But I love approaching this from the idea that this is some abstract art deconstruction.
We were talking about bite-sized entertainment, episodic TV. I think this would have worked better, but there's not the same way to monetize it. It would have worked better as like 3 to 5, a series of 3 to 5 minute funnier.
Better for what though? Does that make it more enjoyable? It's not supposed to be enjoyable.
That's
what I'm saying. It's just supposed to tell you that this isn't enjoyable. You think you're going to love it, but it's not. You're not going to love it. You're going to complain about it, and you're going to move on to something that actually satiates your appetite, which is the message to everybody out there aimlessly drifting in the void, hoping to find something to do, like it's going to smack them in the face, like, oh, this sounds like a good idea. It wasn't, but they keep repeating the process. Go
Rob,
find your true self, your true voice. Don't settle for something that's less than worth your time.
But Rob, this movie could have been good. I know you're saying that the point is it's bad and it's like a cold Pop-Tart on the shelf and all that stuff. But with those other movies we mentioned that are kind of poking
Gentlemen,
fun
it's
and
not
satire.
about whether movies could be good or bad. Only it is what is.
Well, I don't believe that
I
they
found it
set out
interesting
to
that
make
you
an
guys bring up
unfunny movie.
Weird as well, because Weird was a fun movie to watch. I love it. I'm a huge UHF fan, so I've been waiting forever for Weird Al to make another film. And as it slowly rolled into things, I'm like, okay, this is a little bit more serious than I thought. It's, taking it serious. And then obviously the dials get turned a lot, and we're parodying all the different biopics out there in the same way that UHF parodied cable culture in the late 80s. So I'm like, okay, there's a nice parallelism here. It's still a nice commentary on what's going on in the industry. But they're trying to make, obviously, two things. A really good film about Weird Al that isn't about Weird Al, in the same way that Jim Carrey's autobiography isn't really about Jim Carrey's story at all. He has these grandiose, fantastical adventures that aren't real, but boy, they make for good writing in the middle of his story when something isn't that fun. But those are supposed to be good, and they're trying to be good. This is saying movies aren't good, and they're not good anymore because we keep settling for less than we deserve.
I think that's an interesting take for sure. I love that approach to this film. Let's talk about the plot a little bit through here, just for the viewers that haven't seen it. So Jerry Seinfeld plays Bob Cabana. He is he's a version of the real life creator of the Pop-Tart, but they do change some of the names in this because I think it gets so ridiculous. He finds out that Post is going to create this toaster pastry called the Country Square, and so this film is about him assembling a team and trying to get their product to market before Post can. It stars, like Rob said, it stars a million different people. Jim Gaffigan plays like Kellogg the Third, his boss and the one in charge. I thought he was very good in this movie. He was one of my favorites. I actually thought Bill Burr had one of the funniest scenes in the movie. I don't know what you guys thought of that. I mean, the impression aside, I'm not saying it was perfect. I thought that scene was the funniest. That scene made me laugh.
I thought, for me, the two best scenes were Mad Men, when they brought in Mad Men.
I thought that was great.
And especially because I had read that Mad Men was going to be in it. I didn't really know the plot of the movie, so I didn't realize it was set in the 60s. So I'm like, I love that they're in that period, right? Like, that makes total sense.
And they can't call him in like the credits, the character names, but he even calls the guy Rogers. They leave him like they are actually like doubling down. Those are the guys.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious.
And anytime the Dumpster Kids were on screen, I loved the Dumpster
Did you like the
Kids.
anachronism of the old timey, like they talked like they were adults?
Yeah.
Which was just.
Yeah. I love the Dumpster Kids. I wonder if
put it on the poster. I love the Dumpster Kids.
I love the Dumpster Kids. I was wondering if maybe Melissa McCarthy was like doing the girl's lines and then the girl would imitate her, because like some of the line reads from that girl seemed very Melissa McCarthy-esque. And
I like Melissa McCarthy in a role like this.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge Melissa McCarthy fan. I like some of her more dramatic stuff. Some of her Bridesmaids, The Heat, some of that. I mean, those are just no-brainers. The Paul Feig stuff I like. Not a fan of her stuff that she does with the husband. But this movie, I thought she was good.
Yeah, I don't have as much of a dislike for her as you do, and
don't hate her. It's just that shtick I don't care for. Necessarily in that.
And really, I come down on I like her with Paul Feig a lot of, and her dramatic stuff, her art house stuff. But
I thought she was funny in this movie, and because she's kind of understated, but I thought her lines were good. Her delivery of the lines were good. So basically, they assemble. It's like the Right Stuff. Is that what the?
It's like the Expendables of breakfast cereal, right?
Yeah, it's the whole like getting the team together. That's gonna, they poach her from NASA.
But so it's like the kind of a parody of the space race and getting the team together. So they get together the Taste Pilots, and they are Tom Carvel, played by Adrian Martinez, Steve Schwinn, Jack McBrayer, Harold von Brunhut, which like the running joke is that they don't quite know what he was up to in the early 40s.
Yeah, he's basically a Nazi.
Basically, without saying it. Played by Thomas Lennon, who I love him. He's a great comedian. Chef Boyardee is Bobby Moynihan, and Jack LaLanne, James Marsden. Man, James Marsden does not half-ass anything. I'll tell you, he is in it and dedicated. I mean, I really like him as an actor. I liked him in the Sonic movies. When it comes to comedy, it's like he's all in. And I
didn't like him so much in Quiet on the Set.
Was he in that?
He shows up. He's really? Not in it, but they talk about him. He shows up to defend
his letter, right?
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, that maybe wasn't the best look. I forgot that he wrote a letter for the guy. That's a whole different conversation. But talk about docu-series. the whole basis, the whole middle part of the movie is them trying to develop the Pop-Tart. And, you know, it's ridiculous, like Rob said. And I mean, it definitely is unapologetic in the way that it's just this absurd, trying to develop this with these guys in a test lab and making it seem like it's larger than life. And that's part of the tall tale element. The movie bookends with Jerry Seinfeld's character talking to a kid in a diner. He looks like he's running away. He's got his knapsack over his shoulder. And he sits down, tells him this story. And so I do feel like that is a bit of an excuse for how ridiculous the movie is. I'm not saying it needs an excuse, but if you're going to say, well, they're telling this story and it's so ridiculous. I mean, it is a tall tale told by a person trying to keep a kid there and keep him entertained.
Yeah.
So
he even says at the end, like, I made that part up.
Yeah.
Like about the ravioli that takes that part.
Yeah, but did
he?
But did he? That's
yeah.
But that's the little wink at the end of the camera. It's pure absurdity when it comes to that stuff. So the villain of the story is the Post heiress, Marjorie Post, who was a real life person, played by Amy Schumer, and she's there with Schmidt from the New Girl. And apparently these two cereal companies, their buildings really were like right down the street from each other, which I thought was a funny little realty in all of this. And so they're spying on each other. They're trying to beat each other to the move. And there's some funny cutaways with her. And I did like that stuff, like the fact that there's this villainous serial heiress that's trying to take them out, and apparently she really was infatuated with the Russians, and
oh really?
Yeah, and so she didn't really go to Russia and try to get sugar. That's one of the tall tales from this movie, but she really was infatuated with Russian culture and Russian things. And so in the movie she goes to Russia after they cut off the sugar supply and tries to go get sugar from them. Did you know, I read that El Sucre, who's played by Felix Solis in this film, who's like the sugar cartel that they go to visit, Seinfeld said he wanted Daniel Day-Lewis to bring him out of retirement for this role.
Okay. Good luck with that.
Yeah. I just thought, what a final film, come out of retirement, maybe never do anything again. But could you imagine if Daniel Day-Lewis showed up in this?
Apparently Daniel Day-Lewis couldn't.
I don't think he actually asked him, but I do think that definitely would have added to the absurdity of the whole thing if they got him.
I suppose. I do like the scene where they assassinate the ventriloquist dummy.
Yeah.
And he's still doing the act. He's like, that's professionalism.
Yeah, Tony Hale from Arrested Development.
Yeah.
This movie is full of those gags, though, right? It's like, who's in it? If you're Jerry Seinfeld, obviously...
Nobody's going to say no to you.
No, you're going to show up. He's got a lot of friends. They're going to show up. They can do a day on set.
And even if they're not friends, he has so many people that idolize him comedically.
Yeah.
That if you get... I mean, kind of like before Woody Allen's downfall, people would be like, if Woody Allen said, come be in my movie, you would be like, not a problem, and you would show up regardless of how little it was going to pay you.
Yeah. So one of the other absurd scenes, other than
Jerry Seinfeld also likes 17-year-old girls. So there's that.
Oh, is that a thing?
Well, his wife, he met her when she was 17 and he was like 41.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Another scene, like similar in tone, two of my favorite scenes. Well, I should say three. So there's the Bill Burr as JFK scene. I thought that was funny. I like the idea of the five cereal families.
Yeah.
They get together: Kellogg's, Post, General Mills, Ralston, and Quaker. And the Keebler guy brings the fudge stripe cookies. I that kind of stuff, when like the absurdity of having this milk cabal and the five cereal families and all that. I love that stuff. I think that those are just such funny ideas that come out of left field when you're talking about businessmen in suits you think is a stuffy corporate guys trying to come up with the idea of a Pop-Tart, right? And so these things lend to the fun of the movie. I like those situations. So anyway, the families meet together, and Kellogg's is like goes to get the sugar supply. Then Post has to go to Russia. So there's those two stories going at the same time. Seinfeld's character is kidnapped by a milkman played by Christian Slater, and they're brought to this farm. They're in this
Friendly Farms.
Friendly Farms, yes, exactly. There's a fun outtake at the end with him trying to rehearse that or to say the line. And it's Peter Dinklage is like in charge of the whole milk cabal.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's great to see great actors show up, talented actors show up and stuff like this, and have fun with it. So can't help but to smile at the people that show up in this movie. The one thing that is kind of weird to me, and you guys tell me, I know that this is a sensationalized story, but when you're taking real people or characters based on real people, like the Schwinn guy, and have him die, You know, like the Schwinn guy. I mean, they changed the name, but he's clearly supposed to be the inventor of the Schwinn Bicycle Company, and they have him die in a tragic Pop-Tart accident. And that, I don't know, it's kind of like with Pain and Gain. I know in that maybe it's a little bit more of a direct, but it's like these are real people.
I guess because Pain and Gain, for all of its being, for as stylized as it was still it was still purporting to tell a true story.
Yeah,
this is not. And
that's
so,
true.
it's
Kev,
this is a
you're
cartoon.
complaining about a movie about the origin of Pop-Tarts and factual sensitivity to people that may or may not be represented on screen. We're talking about Pop-Tarts.
It's a fair
and the
point.
milk cabal. You followed up saying your favorite scene was the milk cabal, but maybe the film would have been better if they would have been a little bit more sensitive about the Schwinn killing.
I know, but it's interesting because with these I will say these aren't documentaries; they're not supposed to be factual. But I will say that a lot of people do learn things from movies, and even a movie like this, there are people that will take away these as embellished but true events that happened, and sometimes
a lot of people think Pop-Tarts are okay for breakfast.
Fair enough.
I can't believe that Paula Poundstone was not in this movie.
So when Jerry Seinfeld in 2017 tweeted about this idea that had been rolling around in their heads, and another very telling thing about Jerry Seinfeld, pop culture, and the younger crowd, I went back to this tweet from 2017, does not have one comment, one interaction from current day after this movie came out. No one went back and tried to find the tweet. No one was like, oh, I got to go to that tweet and comment. Or I almost did, but then I'm like, well, what's the point of doing that? But, I just thought it was really interesting. Like the kids that are on social media, right? The younger crowd that's so into it, not one interaction. And the whole movie was based on the idea that he tweeted about 7 years ago, and I just thought that was a really interesting thing, because people usually do go back as soon as a current event happens. What do people do? They go back and they say, this didn't hold up, or, they say something about it. One of the comments on the tweet was, get someone and Paula Poundstone. So that was an immediate.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, Paula Poundstone, one of her most famous routines is about Pop-Tarts, and that's from probably 30, 40 years ago at this point. But
well, one of Jim Gaffigan's most famous routines is the Hot Pocket.
Hot Pockets.
How did they not make a Pop-Tart too hot, the stuff inside joke based on...
I was surprised we didn't get a recycle of one of Jerry Seinfeld's most famous Seinfeld-esque jokes where he's talking about grape nuts, and he's like, open a box of grape nuts. No grapes, no nuts. What's the deal there? That seemed ripe for bringing out of retirement.
The one thing that I do love that this film does well is the directorial approach, the stylistic use of sets and camera movements and positioning and blocking of the actors. There's almost a very Wes Anderson approach to this, where there's a lot of quick, stable shots, and then you'll pan left or right 90 degrees to kind of reveal the world that's there. Again, it just reinforces a lot of the fantastical elements. The dumpster kids I thought were great, mainly because they're almost like current contemporary kids in so many ways. Like, they're just telling how honest it is while all this like nonsense is going around them. They just want the goopy crap that tastes good. I don't care what you call it. By the way, who are you guys in your suits in this weird place that you've brought us to? Again, another whole kind of metaphor for what this film is. It doesn't really matter. Just give us the goop. Right?
That is a very good point. There's this other B plot of Thurl Ravenscroft, who did the voice of Tony the Tiger in all his commercials. I know him from The Grinch. The Grinch is one of my favorite. That's what I want to talk about. Rob, The Grinch, which aired on television, the famous Christmas classic.
Boris Karloff?
Is that a short film? Is that a film?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's a TV show.
Tom says it's a TV show, and I argue it's a film.
It was created for television. It's not like it's
that's
short.
the medium, though.
It's screened theatrically. It's like Tom and Jerry cartoons play on television,
but they were created for theatrical releases. Like I'll grant you that, because those originally aired in theaters and then were repurposed for television. Mm-hmm. But The Grinch was only ever intended to air on television.
Now, can you verify its intent was only ever to air in television, that it actually wasn't produced ahead of time before the theatrical short demise, which actually forced cartoons to be made for Saturday morning? Because there was an overlap, and that production took a while. And while it came out, I believe, in 1962, Saturday morning cartoons didn't really start till 1963, and that's when they were also in the primetime slot, especially for the Rankin and Bass stuff that we saw during primetime. And so it may have appeared then, but the intent may have been to pair it with a feature, which is why production started earlier, which is why I think, especially with the budget and the stars involved, it's a theatrical short and not a television special.
I mean, it's only ever described as like if you go to Wikipedia, it's an American animated television
on TV.
Special. Yeah.
It premiered on TV. Granted, so did Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and a lot of those early Rankin Bass efforts. But what I'm saying, it was created in theatrical style for intended theatrical release. But when that system collapsed, it was pushed out on TV.
This says.
I'm also wondering if it won any awards and were the awards like what awards it may have won. And that may also link to some of the information, like if it wins an Emmy versus like an Oscar for animation. An Oscar is clearly for a film, where an Emmy is clearly for television.
Well, this says How the Grinch Stole Christmas was produced by Cat in the Hat Productions in association with the television and animation divisions of MGM.
No, I understand that.
What I'm saying is that the television division of MGM developed the property. If the television division is making the thing and it airs on TV, I don't know what we're arguing about.
Yeah, it's not an argument. It's my simple belief based on the quality and the production budget and the time that it came out that it was intended for theatrical release.
It's just a fun argument we have because, and again, it's not really an argument. It's a fun debate that we have because I think of it as a short film that aired on TV. And especially, like you said, Rob, with the names involved with Boris Karloff and Thurl Ravenscroft. And you know, like, to me, it seems like...
I don't really have a dog in the race. I think it as a good, show or movie or short, whatever vernacular you want to use. But based on the time and the budget and how it was created... I also think the manner in which it was created, the amount of frames per second is not typical of television either. Like it's true animation. It's 24 frames per second. It isn't limited. I don't think it's 12 or 18.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd like to go watch. I don't know if they've ever made a documentary on the making of The Grinch. But this Thurl Ravenscroft, played by Hugh Grant, he is doing something really fun here. There's something is Hugh Grant has his career has kind of changed. He used to do these romantic comedies, right?
Yeah.
And in his career trajectory has kind of changed to these comedies. The Gentleman is one that really I loved him in that movie. I thought he was one of the best. But I do like what he's doing here because I feel like, again, Hugh Grant, he understands the assignment. He's having fun with this character, this theatrically trained actor who is taking this role as Tony the Tiger to pay the bills and wants to do something more. And I do think he's having fun with it. So he's another one of my favorites in the movie. What it comes down to is that they get the Pop-Tart, they get the design for it. They need to, get it approved by the FDA before it gets put on shelves. And the whole January 6th allegory thing, I did not expect that.
Yeah. That
kind of threw me for a loop. And but the whole thing comes down to before the FDA, the guy is played by Fred Armisen, can approve the product, Thurl Ravenscroft and all his mascots are basically storming the Kellogg's headquarters
because there's not a mascot for Pop-Tarts. They're like they're doing an end run around mascots.
Yeah, and so it runs into this big, looks like January 6th. There's all this chaos going on. It ends up getting approved. Jerry Seinfeld basically takes a stamper. I did think that line was funny. He's like, "No, you can't. You're not trained to do that." Yeah. And he stamps the FDA approval. And he goes, "Oh, that really was easy. I guess like that was a good line." They get out there when it goes to shelves. It's Post versus Kellogg's on either side of the aisle. The kids go in there and they of course choose Pop-Tarts. The other one is Country Squares, and they say people don't want to be associated with Country or Squares.
Yeah,
definitely not them together. So Pop-Tarts win the day in this story. They sell out, they say, in 60 seconds. I read in real life Pop-Tarts actually did sell out. There was a huge demand for them.
Oh, really?
It just it wasn't that quick, but they actually did completely sell out of store shelves.
They were the snack wells of their day.
And then this bit at the end, when Bob is going on Johnny Carson to talk about Pop-Tarts and the huge hit they were. Is that archival footage? That looked just like Johnny Carson.
I think they took archival footage and then tweaked the mouth.
Okay.
And then there's like an impersonator talk. Because Carson was saying stuff that was very specific to the film. I forget exactly what. But it wasn't like they took something and then wrote Jerry's responses around it. But I think that was footage that they manipulated digitally.
Okay, because I was like, that looked just like Carson.
Yeah,
and
no,
an
that was...
impersonator, you might get close, but I'm like, that had to be Carson. Okay, so and then the big absurd joke at the end is that Andy Warhol busts in, and apparently Pop-Tarts were named to take advantage of the pop art movement by Warhol. So the fact that he would then storm in the studio and shoot Bob, because
I did like the naming structure of how like your name's there the whole time, and it was Tart spelled out, and then the Trat Pop, and then I liked all that stuff.
Yeah,
I didn't hate this movie.
Yeah, no, it's not as bad as people. I think again, it's a different generation that's judging it, right?
Yeah, I'm also old.
But no, the Trat Pop thing was pretty funny, and the fact that they would manufacture the boxes and the logos and everything, Trat Pops, and then who is it? It's
Walter Cronkite.
Yeah. Sorry, that he's playing with silly putty. He's playing with all these toys throughout the movie, and then he takes it and can't find his papers, so he looks at the putty and it's reversed, and he says Pop-Tarts. And we got to change everything. But yeah, and then at the end of the movie, again, it's like the tall tale thing. The kid that was running away, his family comes and takes him. They're like, "Thank you," and he's just like, "Oh, that was all made up." And then the little ravioli that Boyardee and the German guy were working on that ran away from their lab pops out of the pocket, and he pushes him back down.
The ravioli creeped me out, not gonna lie.
I definitely think it was supposed to. That's a weird.
It weirded me out. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I said, it was fine. Like I did not hate this movie with the passion the internet seems to have for it. It was not great, but I was reasonably entertained while I watched it. So yeah. Well, anyway, I guess that's it for this one. Let's go around the table and everybody can say where to find them.
This is Kevin. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinRBrackett.
And where can they find you?
You can find me at Instagram and X, or Twitter as it's formerly known as, at Rob McZob. I have a Linktree link there as well. You can probably link to all the different stuff. And of course, N64 Quest, if you want to learn more about that and follow that stuff. And we'll be probably putting lots of stuff out about Doom. And like you said, Mr. Dress Up is available on Prime Video, the documentary of the show that changed Canada forever.
It's seriously, and for our listeners in America, and we do have people all over the world that listen to the show, and I'm sure our Canadian listeners do know all about Mr. Dress Up, but for you in the States, people that grew up with Mr. Rogers especially, watch this documentary and see the parallels and see how the two of them work together, and really, it is beautiful. I teared up a few times, Rob. It is so touching, especially the stuff with the family dynamic that I won't spoil for anyone, but it is phenomenal. So congratulations on all the success, and loved the documentary.
Thanks. And I was just going to say, and when you're watching stuff, eat something better than Pop-Tarts like you'd watch something better than Pop-Tarts. If you want a better reaction, you are what you eat. You feel what you eat. You put crap into your tank, that's how you're going to feel. So if you're worried about not feeling good after watching Unfrosted, maybe watch something that is a little bit more food for your brain.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at Roger Kubert or on Facebook at facebook.com/Tom O'Keefe. So that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, Vernon reads Brian's essay.
Get ready for a spoiler. Won't say it twice because we already warned you. Better watch out. It's going to ruin the plot. Real spoilers. Real spoilers.
Tom, Kev, I've got an answer for our riddle about the Grinch. So, we were debating on the show. Is the Grinch a TV show? Is it a theatrical short or a short film? What is the difference? So, I started doing some deep diving. I did a ton of research, and by a ton of research, like the documentary filmmaker I am, I went right to Wikipedia to find the answer. And it seems it's the best of both worlds. So yes, Tom, you are correct. It was produced with the intention of going on television, but it was produced in a theatrical style in order to gain approval from Dr. Seuss himself. The only way that he would allow the book to be created into an animated special was if it didn't, look like the limited animation of Yogi Bear or Huckleberry Hound. It had to be full-on animation, which is why it had a budget that's 4 times that of Charlie Brown. It was a record. It'd be like making it for $3 million today. It only took 2 months to make. There's no script for it. It's just based on the book. So Chuck Jones would actually have to go and act everything out to presentations to get sponsors to get the funding to do it. But it was made in 1966, might I add, not 62. So it was made theatrically. The approach was theatrical, and it had to stand out against the other kind of low-budget, limited animation approach that had been on television, especially that year, because it was the introduction of Saturday morning cartoons. So we are both right, but if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty, yes, it was produced for television, but in a way that it would make it look better than anything else on television, which dovetails nicely into our conversation about, is a film of film if it doesn't appear on the big screen, if it just goes straight to Netflix, the way we talked about that medium, the first generation of the new thing getting criticized. So that's an early example of that. I love that our discussion paralleled it without even unknowingly trying to. It just did. Stay cool, my friends.